When they called the emergency department meeting, my boss announced layoffs due to restructuring. Everyone panicked. I smiled. They didn't know my plan had been brewing for 2 years, and today, the day they thought would be my downfall, would become the most lucrative payday of my life. While my colleagues begged for mercy, I sat quietly, knowing that in 3 hours, the hunters would become the hunted, and their precious corporate empire would write me the biggest check they'd ever signed. My name is Emily Hartman, and at 34, I'd spent the last 8 years of my life bleeding myself dry for Silver Point Capital. From my corner cubicle on the 42nd floor of our Manhattan Tower, I could see the Hudson River stretching toward Jersey, a view that once filled me with pride. Now it just reminded me how small we all looked from up here, disposable dots in the grand machine of corporate America. I started here as a junior financial analyst, fresh from Wharton with dreams bigger than my student loans. Back then, I believed in meritocracy, in the promise that hard work and brilliance would be rewarded. I pulled 18-hour days, skipped vacations, missed my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, all for the golden promise of partnership track. The American dream, wrapped in a Brooks Brothers suit and served with a side of systematic exploitation. Silver Point Capital wasn't just any investment firm. With $60 billion under management, we were the kind of place where junior analysts drove Teslas and senior partners collected Basquiat's. The lobby gleamed with Italian marble that cost more per square foot than most Americans made in a year. Every morning, 2,000 employees swiped their badges through those glass doors, each believing they were special, chosen, destined for greatness. The reality was different. Behind the prestige lurked a culture so toxic it could have been classified as a Superfund site. We had a saying here: you're either at the table or on the menu. I learned quickly that being good at your job meant nothing if you didn't play the game. The game had unwritten rules: laugh at the right jokes, attend the right happy hours, and most importantly, know whose ring to kiss. My department, Strategic Financial Analysis, was a Shark Tank disguised as a think tank. 23 of us crammed into an open floor plan designed to foster collaboration, but really meant to ensure nobody could slack off without being noticed. The air always smelled of burnt coffee and desperation, punctuated by the clicking of mechanical keyboards and the occasional muffled sob from the bathroom stalls. Every morning, I'd arrive at 6:30 a.m., an hour before most of my colleagues. Not because I was eager, God, that eagerness had died years ago, but because information was currency here. And the early bird got the confidential emails. I'd scan through overnight reports from our Asian markets, prepare executive summaries that my boss would later present as his own work, and steel myself for another day of calculated humiliation. The office politics were Byzantine in their complexity. Alliances shifted daily. Yesterday's mentor became today's saboteur. We smiled at each other in meetings while sharpening knives under conference tables. Performance reviews were blood sports where your colleagues' anonymous feedback could torpedo your career. They called it 360-degree feedback, but it was really just sanctioned character assassination. I'd watched good people break here. Jennifer from Risk Management, who started antidepressants after her third passed-over promotion. Marcus from Compliance, whose wife left him because he was never home before midnight. Sarah from my own team, who had a panic attack so severe they had to call an ambulance. She never came back. They said she pursued other opportunities. But I heard she was working at a nonprofit in Vermont, making a third of her old salary but sleeping through the night for the first time in years. But I was different. I didn't break. I evolved. I learned to document everything, to save emails in hidden folders, to record conversations on my phone when legal. I studied my enemies like a general preparing for war. I knew Richard Langston's affair with his secretary, Samantha Green's fraudulent expense reports, the COO's cocaine habit that fueled his legendary productivity. Information was ammunition, and I'd been stockpiling for years. They thought I was just another cog, grinding away at spreadsheets and PowerPoints, grateful for my 6-figure salary and the privilege of being slowly destroyed by their machine. They had no idea that every slight, every stolen idea, Every passed-over promotion had been carefully cataloged in my mind. I wasn't just an analyst, I was an archivist of their sins. Today's meeting would change everything. They thought they were predators circling wounded prey. They couldn't see that I'd already evolved past their food chain entirely. I was something new, something they'd created but couldn't control. A corporate warrior who'd learned all their tricks and invented a few of my own. The conference room fell silent as Richard Langston, our CFO, clicked to the next PowerPoint slide. The word restructuring appeared in bold corporate blue, the font choice somehow making devastation look professional. Around the mahogany table, 23 faces went pale. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, my pulse quickened with anticipation rather than fear. "I won't sugarcoat this," Richard said, his Hermes tie catching the light as he gestured. "Market conditions have forced us to make difficult decisions. We're implementing a 30% reduction in force across strategic financial analysis, effective immediately." The gasp was collective, primal. Amanda from Derivatives started crying silently, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. Josh, who'd just bought a condo in Tribeca, looked like he might vomit. The room smelled of fierce sweat and dying careers. "Those affected will be notified within the hour," Richard continued, his voice carrying the practiced empathy of someone who'd delivered this speech before. "We've prepared generous severance packages, 2 weeks per year of service, continued health benefits for 3 months, and career counseling services." Generous. I almost laughed. They were about to destroy lives in calling 2 weeks per year generous. Josh had been here 18 months. He'd get 9 weeks of pay to figure out how to afford a mortgage that assumed he'd keep climbing the Silver Point ladder forever. Samantha Green, senior director and my personal nemesis, stood beside Richard with a clipboard, playing the role of compassionate executioner. She wore her favorite Chanel suit, the cream one she'd bought after getting the promotion that should have been mine. Her face was arranged in what she probably thought looked sympathetic but came off as constipated. "We know this is difficult," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But these changes are necessary to ensure Silver Point remains competitive in an evolving marketplace. Those who remain will be part of a leaner, more agile organization." Leaner. Agile. Corporate buzzwords designed to make cruelty sound strategic. What she meant was, we're keeping the kiss asses and the connected, merit be damned. As she spoke, I noticed her eyes kept finding mine, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She thought she was watching my destruction in real time, savoring it like a fine wine. She had no idea she was actually watching her own countdown clock. The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes, filled with empty platitudes about maintaining excellence and emerging stronger. Then they dismissed us, told us to return to our desks and wait for HR. The walk back to the bullpen felt like a funeral procession. Some people were already boxing up their belongings, not waiting for the official word. They knew who was valuable and who was expendable. I sat at my desk, fingers moving across my keyboard, looking busy while actually reviewing the encrypted files on my personal drive. 2 years of evidence, meticulously organized. Fraudulent quarterly reports with Richard's digital signature. Emails discussing illegal coordination with supposed competitors. Samantha's paper trail of insider trading, small enough to avoid SEC attention, but large enough to end her career. At 11:47 a.m., Gerald from HR appeared at my desk. Baby-faced, despite being 40, perpetually nervous. The kind of man who apologized for existing. He was carrying a manila folder, the corporate kiss of death. "Emily," he whispered, as if saying it louder would make it more real. "Could you come with me? Please?" I followed him to the small conference room they designated as the kill floor. Through the glass, I could see others getting the same treatment. Marcus was in the room next door, his face red with rage. Jennifer was signing papers with shaking hands. "Emily," Gerald began, sliding the folder across to me. "I'm sorry to inform you that your position has been eliminated as part of our restructuring initiative." I opened the folder slowly, scanning the termination agreement, 9 weeks of severance, they'd rounded up. How generous. A non-disclosure agreement. A non-compete clause. And buried on page 3, a liability waiver absolving Silver Point of any wrongdoing. "This is the standard package," Gerald said, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "If you sign today, we can process your final payment by Friday." I looked up at him, then through the glass wall where I could see Richard and Samantha in the main conference room, champagne flutes in hand. They weren't even waiting for the bodies to be cleared before celebrating. The sight of them toasting to their successful restructuring while careers died around them filled me with cold satisfaction. "Gerald," I said quietly, folding the papers and sliding them back. "I'm going to need some time to review this with my attorney." His face went white. Nobody said attorney in these situations. You were supposed to sign, slink away, and be grateful for whatever scraps they threw you. "Of course," he stammered. "You have 5 business days to—" "I'm aware of my rights," I interrupted, standing up. "I'll be in touch." As I walked back to my desk, I saw Samantha watching me through the conference room glass. The smirk was gone, replaced by a slight frown. She'd expected tears, begging, maybe even gratitude for the severance. Instead, she got calm defiance. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Mark Rivers, the financial journalist who'd been waiting 2 years for this moment. "Green light, check your email in 1 hour." Then I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the chaos of my dying department, and smiled for the first time in months. They thought they were restructuring. They had no idea they were actually triggering their own demolition. The memories came flooding back as I packed my desk, each item a remnant of the woman I used to be. The framed MBA diploma. I remembered hanging it my first day. So proud, so naive. The coffee mug from the company retreat in Aspen 3 years ago, back when I still believed I had a future here. Each object told the story of my transformation from idealistic analyst to corporate casualty. It started 4 years ago. The systematic destruction of my career. I'd identified a major discrepancy in our Asian market portfolios. Nearly $40 million in misallocated funds that violated SEC regulations. I'd worked 60 straight hours documenting everything, creating a comprehensive report that would save the company from massive fines and potential criminal charges. I presented it to Richard Langston privately, thinking I was protecting the firm. 2 weeks later, Richard presented my work to the board as his own discovery. He received a 7-figure bonus for his vigilance and exceptional risk management. I received a pat on the head and a 3% raise, standard cost of living adjustment. When I confronted him, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's how it works here, Emily. Consider it tuition for your real education." But that was just the beginning. Samantha Green arrived a year later, transferred from our London office with a reputation for getting things done. We were peers, technically, both senior analysts gunning for the same director position. I had seniority, better performance reviews, and a track record of successful portfolios. But Samantha had something more valuable. She knew how to play dirty. She started small. Accidentally scheduling client calls during my presentations. Forgetting to copy me on critical emails. Once, she deleted my name from a report we'd co-authored, claiming it was a formatting error. But her masterpiece came during the Henderson acquisition. I'd spent 3 months analyzing Henderson Corp., building relationships with their executives, crafting the perfect acquisition strategy. The night before the final presentation, my laptop was mysteriously wiped clean. It said it was a system error, but I knew better. Samantha presented the next morning using my research, my strategies, my exact phrases that she'd memorized from our meetings. She got the director position. I got a sympathy card from HR about my technical difficulties. The rage almost consumed me then. I spent nights fantasizing about exposure, about justice, about watching them fall. But rage without purpose is just self-destruction. So I channeled it, refined it, turned it into something useful. I started documenting everything, every email, every meeting, every suspicious transaction. That's when I discovered the real rot. Richard wasn't just stealing credit, he was stealing money. Phantom consulting fees to shell companies he controlled. Inflated expense reports that funded his house in the Hamptons. Trading on insider information he gleaned from board meetings. The man who preached fiscal responsibility in all-hands meetings was embezzling like a common thief. Samantha had her own sins. She was trading on insider information, using her romantic relationship with a board member to get advance notice of mergers and acquisitions. Her personal portfolio had mysteriously outperformed the market by 340% over 2 years. She thought she was careful, using her ex-husband's accounts, routing trades through offshore brokers. But patterns don't lie, and I'd become an expert at finding patterns. The others had their secrets too. David in compliance, who signed off on questionable trades in exchange for Knicks season tickets. Patricia in legal, who buried sexual harassment complaints for executives who knew about her son's drug arrest. Michael in IT, who sold client data to competitors. The entire leadership structure was a Jenga tower of mutual blackmail and shared guilt. But what transformed my anger into purpose was what happened to Catherine Walsh. Catherine was my mentor, the only executive who'd ever fought for me. When she tried to promote me over Samantha, she suddenly faced an ethics investigation. Anonymous complaints about inappropriate behavior, falsified expense reports, rumors of alcoholism. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when the machine wants you gone. Catherine was forced to resign in disgrace. 6 months later, she killed herself. The note said she couldn't live with the shame of false accusations that had destroyed her reputation. That's when I knew this wasn't just about my career anymore. This was about Catherine, and Jennifer, and Marcus, and every good person ground to dust by this machine. They'd created a system where only the corrupt could thrive, where integrity was a liability, where human decency was weakness to be exploited. I thought about the 18-year-old Emily who'd walked into this building with such hope. She'd wanted to build something, to matter, to prove that a girl from a working-class family in Ohio could make it on Wall Street. That girl was dead now, murdered slowly by 1,000 cuts of corporate cruelty. But from her ashes rose someone stronger, someone who understood that in a game with no rules, the only winning move is to flip the board entirely. They thought they were predators, and I was prey. They couldn't conceive that prey could evolve, could grow teeth, could turn the hunters into the hunted. Every humiliation, every stolen opportunity, every destroyed career, they were all just fuel for what was coming. As I placed the last of my belongings in a cardboard box, I looked around the office one more time. Half the desks were already empty. The survivors huddled in small groups, whispering about mortgages and school tuitions, about what they'd do next. They looked at me with pity, thinking I was just another casualty of corporate downsizing. If only they knew that in 48 hours, the real restructuring would begin. Not the kind announced in boardrooms, but the kind that makes headlines, that triggers FBI investigations, that turns executives into inmates. They'd taken everything from me, from us. Now it was time to return the favor. The plan began 2 years ago, the day after Catherine's funeral. I stood in the rain at Woodlawn Cemetery, watching them lower her casket, and made a promise. Not for revenge, that word was too simple, too emotional. This would be justice, served cold and calculated, with compound interest. Phase 1 was intelligence gathering. I became invisible, the quiet analyst who arrived early and left late, who never complained, who seemed grateful just to have a job. I volunteered for the worst assignments, the ones that gave me access to systems and databases nobody else wanted to touch. Financial audits, compliance reviews. The boring, meticulous work that happened to provide backdoor access to everything. I purchased a set of USB drives, each smaller than a fingernail, each capable of storing terabytes of data. I learned to clone hard drives during bathroom breaks, to install keyloggers that looked like Windows updates, to create ghost accounts in our system that could access files without leaving traces. Every technique learned from YouTube tutorials and dark web forums, nothing illegal, just the same gray area tactics the company used against its own employees. The evidence collection was meticulous. Richard's embezzlement alone took 6 months to fully document. I traced shell companies through Delaware, the Caymans, eventually leading to accounts in Switzerland. $47 million over 5 years, hidden in a web of consulting fees and inflated vendor payments. I had bank statements, wire transfers, emails where he explicitly discussed keeping this off the books. Samantha's insider trading required different tactics. I befriended her assistant, a overworked single mother named Patricia, who made $60,000 a year while managing a woman who spent that much on handbags. Patricia didn't know she was helping me. She just thought I was being nice, bringing her coffee, listening to her complaints. Through her, I learned Samantha's patterns, her meeting schedules, when she made her trades. Cross-referencing with board meeting minutes and acquisition announcements, the pattern was undeniable. But evidence without distribution is just data. That's where Mark Rivers came in. Mark was a financial journalist with the Wall Street Journal, a pit bull who'd made his career exposing corporate corruption. He'd been circling Silver Point for years, sensing something rotten, but unable to prove it. I reached out through an encrypted email service, calling myself Cassandra. We built trust slowly. Me feeding him small stories that always checked out. Him protecting my identity with the fervor of a priest guarding confession. Phase 2 was creating leverage. I needed more than just exposure. I needed to make it impossible for them to simply fire me and move on. So I created what I called the nuclear option. Using my access to the system, I documented every questionable trade, every SEC violation, every client whose money had been mishandled over the past decade. Not just Richard and Samantha's crimes, but the entire leadership teams. If released, it wouldn't just end careers, it would trigger federal investigations, lawsuits from clients, potentially the dissolution of the entire firm. I stored copies everywhere. Cloud services under false names. Physical drives in safety deposit boxes across 3 states. A lawyer in Boston who didn't know what he was holding but had instructions to release it if anything happened to me. Mark Rivers had his own copies, waiting for my signal. Phase 3 was the trap. I needed them to fire me, but in a way that would trigger maximum leverage, so I became selectively incompetent, not enough to justify termination for cause, but enough to make me an obvious target for any layoffs. I missed optional meetings. My reports were competent but uninspired. I stopped playing the political games, no longer laughing at Richard's terrible jokes or complimenting Samantha's latest designer purchase. Meanwhile, I prepared my legal response. Through a friend from law school, I connected with Miranda Chen at Kellerman and Associates, a firm that specialized in wrongful termination and whistleblower cases. Miranda was brilliant, ruthless, and had a personal hatred for Wall Street after her brother lost everything in 2008. She reviewed my evidence and literally salivated. "This isn't just a lawsuit," she said, eyes gleaming. "This is a RICO case, racketeering, criminal conspiracy. With this evidence, we're not talking about a settlement. We're talking about them begging you to name your price." I also established my exit strategy. A new identity wasn't necessary. I wasn't planning to disappear. But I needed to be untouchable once everything exploded. I moved my personal assets to accounts they couldn't freeze. I backed up every personal file, every contact, everything I'd need to start over. I even incorporated a consulting firm in Delaware, ready to catch any consulting fees that might come my way as part of a settlement. The timing had to be perfect. I knew from Patricia that the board was pressuring Richard to cut costs before the quarterly earnings call. The restructuring would come in October, right before bonus season, allowing them to redistribute the saved salaries to executive compensation. The greed was so predictable, it was almost boring. 2 weeks before the announcement, I made my final preparations. I sent Mark Rivers a detailed timeline of when to release what information. First, a teaser article about irregularities at a major investment firm. Then, as Silver Point scrambled to respond, the embezzlement evidence, finally. When they were reeling, the insider trading scandal. Each revelation building on the last, creating a narrative momentum that would be impossible to stop. I also prepared packages for the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the New York Attorney General. Not sent yet. That would depend on how Silver Point responded to my demands. But ready, waiting, like missiles in their silos. The night before the restructuring announcement, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. 2 years of preparation, of careful planning, of patient waiting. Tomorrow, they would think they were ending my career. In reality, they would be initiating their own destruction. I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights, and thought about Catherine, about her brilliance wasted, her integrity punished, her life destroyed by people who weren't worth her little finger. Tomorrow wouldn't bring her back, but it would ensure that her destroyers paid a price that would echo through Wall Street for years. The plan was set, the pieces were in position. All that remained was for them to make their move, to fall into a trap they didn't even know existed. They thought tomorrow would be about restructuring. They were right, just not in the way they imagined. The first cracks appeared within hours of my termination meeting. As I sat in a coffee shop across from Silver Point's tower, laptop open, I watched the destruction begin in real time through our company's internal communication system. I still had 24 hours of access before IT cut me off. Richard's assistant sent a panic-stricken email at 2:47 p.m. Mr. Langston, urgent call from WSJ. They're asking about consulting fees to Bermuda Shell Holdings. By 3:15 p.m., the executive floor was in chaos. Through the ghost account I'd created in our Slack system, I could see the frantic messages flying. Richard was demanding to know who'd talked to the press. Samantha was calling an emergency meeting with legal. The CEO, William Thornton, who'd been golfing in Connecticut, was racing back to the city. Mark Rivers had published his first article at 2:30 p.m., perfectly timed for maximum impact. Just a teaser. Really. Sources indicate significant financial irregularities at major Manhattan investment firm. No names yet. Just enough to make Silver Point's stock dip 3% in after-hours trading. Just enough to make the board start asking questions. I ordered another cappuccino and continued watching. At 4 p.m., Richard made his first mistake. He tried to get ahead of the story by sending an all-staff email about baseless rumors and short sellers trying to manipulate our stock. The lady doth protest too much. His denial would make the next revelation even more damaging. That evening, I met with Miranda at her office. She'd already received 3 calls from Silver Point's legal team, feeling her out, trying to understand what I knew and what I wanted. They're scared, she said, sliding a glass of 18-year-old scotch across her desk. General Counsel himself called, not an associate, not a partner, the top dog. They know you have something. Not yet, I said. Let them sweat through the weekend. Monday, we escalate. The weekend was delicious torture for them. I knew from my access that Richard had hired a private investigator to find the leak. Samantha had called an emergency meeting with her trading partners, trying to cover her tracks. They were all looking outward for the threat, never realizing it had been sitting next to them for years. Monday arrived like thunder. Mark's second article dropped at 6 a.m. Silver Point CFO Richard Langston under investigation for $47 million embezzlement scheme. This time, he had specifics. Account numbers, dates, amounts. Not enough to prove everything, I was saving that. But enough to trigger an SEC investigation. The stock dropped 12% at market open. By noon, the board had called an emergency meeting. Through Patricia, who was texting me in a panic, I learned that Richard had been placed on administrative leave. But they still thought they could contain this. Still thought it was just about Richard. That's when I played my next card. I had Miranda call Silver Point's general counsel with a simple message. My client has information about additional irregularities involving multiple executives. She's willing to discuss a resolution that protects all parties' interests. The call back came in 17 minutes. A meeting was set for that afternoon. The conference room at Kellerman & Associates had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. I chose my outfit carefully, the same black Armani suit I'd worn to Catherine's funeral. When Silver Point's legal team arrived, 4 lawyers led by General Counsel James Morrison. I was already seated, calm as a frozen lake. Ms. Hartman, Morrison began, his voice attempting authority but betraying nervousness. We understand you believe you have information relevant to the company. Miranda slid a single folder across the table. Inside, just enough evidence to show we had everything. Samantha's trading records, David's compliance violations, the entire executive team's dirty laundry, laid out in devastating detail. Morrison's face went from pink to white to gray as he read. The lawyer next to him actually gasped when he reached the section about client funds being misallocated. This is extortion, Morrison said weakly. This is negotiation, Miranda corrected. My client was wrongfully terminated as part of a restructuring that conveniently eliminated the only person who knew about these irregularities. She's prepared to sign an NDA and leave quietly. Or she can continue her conversations with the Wall Street Journal, the SEC, and the FBI. What do you want? Morrison asked, defeated. I spoke for the first time. Justice has a price. Mine is $30 million. The room erupted. That's insane. Impossible. We'll sue you into bankruptcy. I stood up calmly. You have 48 hours. After that, Mark Rivers receives everything. And I mean everything, including the recordings of Richard discussing how to handle Catherine Walsh before her investigation could implicate him. That stopped them cold. They didn't know I didn't actually have those recordings. But Catherine's suicide had always seemed suspicious, and the implication was enough. As we left the conference room, Morrison grabbed my arm. You're destroying people's lives, he hissed. I looked him straight in the eye. No, I'm returning the favor. Tuesday was beautiful chaos. Richard had been arrested at his home in Westchester, handcuffed in front of his neighbors. Samantha was frantically trying to liquidate her assets before they could be frozen. The FBI had shown up at Silver Point with boxes and warrants. Through it all, I waited. Miranda fielded increasingly desperate calls from Morrison. The price was too high, they said. They could do $5 million, then 10, then 15. I held firm. $30 million, or everything goes public. At 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, 13 minutes before the deadline, Morrison called Miranda. We accept your client's terms, he said, sounding like he was chewing glass. $30 million, full NDA, no admission of wrongdoing on either side. I smiled in the darkness of my apartment. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board. All those little lights representing dreams and ambitions and carefully constructed lives. Tomorrow, some of those lights would go out. Richard would face federal charges. Samantha would be bankrupted by legal fees and SEC fines. The board would clean house, desperately trying to save the firm's reputation. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about Catherine, about Jennifer, about Marcus, about everyone who'd been crushed by this machine. $30 million wouldn't bring them back or heal their wounds. But it was a start. It was proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the machine could be forced to pay for the damage it caused. The irony was perfect. They'd called it restructuring, a necessary evil to protect the company's future. In the end, my restructuring would be far more effective and infinitely more profitable. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline October sunlight that made Manhattan's glass towers look like pillars of fire. I dressed carefully, a new Saint Laurent suit I'd bought specifically for this moment, midnight blue with subtle pinstripes that caught the light. The kind of suit that whispered money rather than screaming it. The documents had been prepared overnight by a team of lawyers who'd been paid extra to work through the night and ask no questions. 30 pages of legal precision. Each clause crafted to ensure my absolute protection while maximizing Silver Point's humiliation. The NDA was mutual, but we all knew who really benefited from the silence. Miranda accompanied me to Silver Point's tower. As we walked through the lobby, I'd entered thousands of times as an employee. The security guards did double takes. Word had spread, everyone knew something massive had happened, but nobody knew exactly what. The marble floors reflected our footsteps like gunshots in a cathedral. The executive conference room on the 53rd floor had been chosen deliberately. The same room where they'd planned the restructuring, where they'd decided who would live and who would die. Professionally speaking, now it would host their surrender. The entire board was present. William Thornton, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his usually perfect silver hair slightly disheveled. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 2 days. Around him sat the directors, each wearing the shell-shocked expression of bomb survivors. At the far end, Samantha sat rigid, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She couldn't meet my eyes. Morrison began the meeting with legal formalities, his voice mechanical. We're here to execute a settlement agreement between Silver Point Capital and Emily Hartman regarding her separation from the company. Separation. Such a sanitized word for what they'd tried to do to me. The CFO, Richard's replacement, promoted just yesterday, slid a check across the table. $30 million, drawn on Silver Point's own accounts. The number was printed in that distinctive banking font. Each zero, a small victory. Before I sign, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade through silk. I want to say something. Morrison started to object, but Thornton raised a hand. Let her speak. I stood, looking at each of them in turn. 2 years ago, Catherine Walsh killed herself because of what this company did to her. You all knew she was innocent of those accusations. You all knew Richard orchestrated her downfall because she threatened his embezzlement scheme. And you all stayed silent. Several board members looked away. One covered his face with his hands. You created a culture where only the corrupt could thrive, where people like Richard and Samantha, she flinched at her name, could steal and cheat and destroy lives while good people were driven out or driven to despair. You called it corporate efficiency. I call it organized crime with better suits. That's enough, Morrison interjected. No, I continued. It's not nearly enough. But $30 million and watching your stock price crater while federal investigators crawl through your files, that's a start. I signed the documents with Catherine's pen, a Mont Blanc she'd given me when I first made senior analyst. Each signature felt like a small act of justice. As I stood to leave, Thornton finally spoke. You've destroyed this firm. Thousands of innocent employees will suffer because of your vendetta. I turned back, meeting his gaze steadily. No, Mr. Thornton. You destroyed this firm the day you decided that integrity was less important than quarterly earnings. I just documented the demolition. Samantha suddenly stood, her composure finally cracking. You self-righteous bitch! You think you're some kind of hero. You're just as ruthless as any of us. You're right, I admitted, surprising her. I am ruthless. You taught me to be. The difference is, I used my ruthlessness to expose corruption, not perpetuate it. And unlike you, Samantha, I won't be spending the next 5 years in federal court trying to avoid prison. Her face went pale. She just realized I knew about the call she'd made yesterday to a criminal defense attorney. The walk back through the office was surreal. The trading floor was in chaos, phones ringing constantly, traders shouting over each other. Several recognized me, their faces cycling through confusion, fear, and a strange kind of respect. I was the woman who'd brought down giants. In the elevator, Miranda squeezed my shoulder. How does it feel? Like justice, I said. Expensive, complicated, imperfect justice. The lobby was full of reporters when we reached the ground floor. Someone had leaked that a massive settlement had just been signed. Cameras flashed, questions shouted. But Miranda and I moved through them like sharks through minnows, saying nothing. Outside, I looked back at the tower one last time. In the windows high above, I could see figures standing, watching. The kings and queens of their glass castle, surveying the damage to their kingdom. Mark Rivers was waiting at the corner, his press badge visible, notebook in hand. On the record? He asked hopefully. Off the record, I said. But I'll give you this. The real story isn't about the money they stole. It's about the people they destroyed along the way. Make sure you tell their stories too. He nodded, understanding. The financial crimes would make headlines, but the human cost was the real scandal. As my town car pulled away from the curb, I saw 3 FBI agents entering the building, their badges visible, their faces grim. The investigation would continue for months, maybe years. More revelations would emerge, more careers would end. But I wouldn't be there to see it. My war was over. I'd won not just money, but something more valuable, proof that the machine could be beaten, that the powerful could be held accountable, that sometimes the prey could become the predator and rewrite the rules of the game entirely. The check in my bag represented more than financial security. It was $30 million worth of vindication, paid for with the currency of corporate blood. They'd called it restructuring. I'd called it my biggest payday. And I was just getting started. The private banking office at J. Morgan was hushed, all mahogany and leather, the kind of place where fortunes were discussed in whispers. My banker, a discreet woman named Elizabeth, who specialized in sensitive accounts, pushed the final documents across her desk. "The wire has been confirmed," she said quietly. $30 million, cleared and deposited. Your investment strategy has been implemented as requested, diversified, conservative, designed for long-term wealth preservation. I signed the papers, each signature severing another tie to my old life. Through the window, I could see Silver Point's tower 6 blocks away. From here, it looked small, insignificant, just another glass box among hundreds. My phone buzzed constantly, reporters, headhunters, even former colleagues begging for information. I ignored them all except one text from Marcus, my old teammate who'd also been laid off. "Holy shit, Emily, you're all over Bloomberg. You beautiful, vindictive genius." I smiled, then deleted the message. No trails, no connections, no looking back. The aftermath was even better than I'd orchestrated. Richard's arrest had triggered a domino effect of investigations. The FBI had expanded their probe to include 6 other executives. The SEC announced a formal investigation into a decade of Silver Point's trading practices. Client lawsuits were already being filed, seeking damages that would dwarf my settlement. But the sweetest victory came that afternoon. Samantha Green was arrested at JFK Airport, attempting to board a flight to Geneva. The FBI had frozen her accounts just hours after discovering she'd been trying to move money offshore. The photo of her in handcuffs, designer heels clicking against the terminal floor, would make the front page of tomorrow's Financial Times. I sat in Central Park, watching the sunset paint the sky the color of money and blood. A strange peace settled over me. For 2 years, revenge had been my North Star, the thing that got me up every morning and kept me sharp. Now, with the mission complete, I felt oddly untethered. An elderly woman sat down beside me on the bench, feeding pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs. "Beautiful evening," she said. "Yes." I agreed. "It really is." "You look like someone who just won something important," she observed, shrewd eyes studying my face. "Or lost something," I said. "Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." She laughed, a knowing sound. "In my experience, dear, the best victories are the ones that cost us something. Otherwise, how would we know they mattered?" After she left, I pulled out my phone and made a single call. Catherine's sister, living in Portland, answered on the 3rd ring. "Hannah, it's Emily Hartman. I wanted you to know that the people responsible for what happened to Catherine are facing justice. I can't go into details, but they're paying for what they did." The silence stretched long before Hannah spoke, her voice thick with tears. "She would have been proud of you, Emily, and probably a little scared of you too. When she was the bravest person I knew," I said. "This was for her." "No," Hannah corrected gently. "This was for you. Catherine would have wanted you to move on, not wage war for her ghost. But I'm glad you did it anyway." As night fell over Manhattan, I walked back to my apartment, $30 million richer and strangely empty. The doorman nodded respectfully. Word traveled fast in these buildings. My neighbors would whisper about me now. The woman who'd brought down Silver Point Capital, the whistleblower who'd played the system and won. Inside my apartment, I stood at the window, looking out at the city's electric constellation. Somewhere out there, Richard was in federal custody, probably negotiating a plea deal. Samantha was calling every lawyer she knew, burning through her remaining money at $1,000 an hour. The board was in emergency session, trying to save a company that would never recover. I'd won. Completely. Devastatingly. Perfectly. The phone rang. Miranda calling with updates about the investigation, requests for interviews, offers from other firms who wanted to hire me for my unique expertise in risk management. I let it go to voicemail. Tomorrow, I'd start the next chapter. Maybe I'd start my own firm, or write a book, or disappear entirely and reinvent myself somewhere where nobody knew the name Emily Hartman. The $30 million gave me choices, freedom, the ability to write my own story instead of being a character in someone else's. But tonight, I opened a bottle of champagne, Krug, the same brand they'd been drinking when they celebrated my termination, and raised a glass to the empty room. To Catherine, I said aloud, to justice served cold, to paychecks written in corporate blood, and to restructuring, the real kind, where the guilty pay and the innocent are avenged. The champagne tasted like victory in ashes, sweet and bitter in equal measure. Outside, New York churned on, indifferent to the small war that had just been won in its heart. But in the morning papers, in the federal investigations, in the nightmares of corrupt executives, my revolution would ripple outward, a warning to every corporation that thought its employees were disposable, that accountability was optional, that power meant immunity. They'd called it restructuring, I'd called it my biggest payday. And every zero on that check was worth the price I'd paid to earn it. The October air bit sharp against my face as I stepped out of Silver Point Tower for the last time. Behind me, the building hummed with the particular frequency of panic. Phones ringing, voices raised, the sound of an empire collapsing in real time. I didn't look back. Winners never do. Fifth Avenue stretched before me, a river of yellow cabs and blacktown cars, of ambition and avarice flowing endlessly through Manhattan's veins. My heels clicked against the pavement with metronomic precision, each step taking me further from who I'd been and closer to who I was becoming. A text from Miranda. Wire confirmed, clean sweep, they'll be untangling this for years. I deleted it. Then I removed the SIM card from my phone and dropped it in a trash can. Emily Hartman, the analyst, the victim, the architect of Silver Point's destruction, she was done now. The woman walking down Fifth Avenue was someone new, someone with $30 million and absolutely no fucks left to give. At the corner of 47th Street, I saw him, Richard Langston, flanked by FBI agents, being led from a black SUV into the federal building. Our eyes met for one perfect moment. He looked broken, confused, like a king who'd woken up to find his castle made of sand. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The check in my bag said everything that needed saying. 3 blocks later, I passed a newsstand. The late edition headline screamed, Silver Point meltdown, FBI raids as executive arrests mount. Below, a smaller story. Whistleblower walks away with historic 30mm settlement. The vendor, an old Bengali man who'd sold me coffee every morning for 8 years, recognized me despite my sunglasses. Ms. Emily, he said quietly, pressing a free copy into my hands. You did good. They had it coming. They all do. Eventually, I replied, tucking a $100 bill into his tip jar. His eyes widened, but I was already walking away. At Columbus Circle, I hailed a cab. JFK, I told the driver, International Terminal. As we drove through the city, I watched Manhattan blur past the window, all those towers full of people playing the same game I'd just won, convinced they were predators, never knowing they were always just one whistleblower away from becoming prey. The driver's eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. You running from something or to something? Neither, I said. Just moving forward. Good philosophy. He nodded. City like this, you stand still too long. It eats you alive. At the airport, I bought a first-class ticket to Zurich. Not running. I had nothing to run from anymore. Every document was legal, every dollar clean, every move protected by the best lawyers money could buy. I was going to Zurich because I could. Because $30 million meant never having to explain yourself to anyone ever again. While waiting at the gate, I opened my laptop one last time. An email from Mark Rivers. Story goes live tomorrow. Front page. This will change everything. I typed back, make sure you spell Catherine Walsh's name right. She deserves that much. Then I closed the laptop forever. Emily Hartman's war was over. As the plane lifted off, I watched Manhattan shrink below, becoming just a glittering circuit board, then a spark, then nothing. Somewhere down there, Samantha was probably crying in a holding cell. The board was calling emergency meetings. The survivors at Silver Point were updating their resumes, rats fleeing the sinking ship. And Catherine? Catherine was still dead. $30 million wouldn't bring her back. But maybe, somewhere in whatever comes after, she knew that her death had meant something, that someone had cared enough to burn it all down in her name. I ordered champagne from the flight attendant, Dom Perignon this time, because I could, and raised my glass to the window, to the dark Atlantic below, to the future spreading infinite before me. They'd called it restructuring, a necessary evil, corporate evolution, the price of doing business. I'd called it something else, justice, revenge, the most lucrative termination in Wall Street history. But really, in the end, it was simpler than all that. It was just my biggest payday, and I'd earned every fucking cent. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I hope Emily's journey kept you on the edge of your seat. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of Wall Street warfare, please subscribe to the channel for more thrilling revenge stories and share your thoughts about Emily's actions. Was she justified? What would you have done in her position? Let me know in the comments below.